It's very happy for me to have this conference and sit here and have three keynote speakers. Very happy for me to have them here. Thank you very much for Professor Juliet Willetts, Pak Tony Prasetiantono, and Ibu Salmi to come to Yogyakarta. Okay, to save times, I will introduce them one by one. First, Pak Tony Prasetiantono will give a speech first. Pak Tony Prasetiantono is a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and he is a director for Center for Economic and Public Policy Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and he is also independent commissioner of Permata Bank, and also a member of the supervisory body of Bank Indonesia. He has graduated from Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and also Master of Science from the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and he was graduated for doctoral degree from the Australian National University, Australia, and he is now also before he also has experience on the chief economist of Bank Indonesia, and member of Information Committee Indonesian Deposit Insurance Corporation, and a member of Selection Committee of Board of Commissioners of Indonesia's Financial Service Authority. And Professor Juliet Willetts she has environmental engineering positions in and also NGO India for the last 15 years, and he is a professor in an Institute for Sustainable Futures, University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, and she was graduate from University of Sydney from Science and Engineering degrees, and also University of New South Wales for Environmental Engineering in a Ph.D. for her Ph.D. And her research interest now is sustainability, development in Asia Pacific, and access to basic services, and also especially in water and sanitation. Dr. Salmi Muhammad Isa is a lecturer in the University Science Malaysia, and she was 7 years with industry and to date with academia, and she graduated from University of Hull, United Kingdom. Her research interest is on the marketing innovation, neuromarketing, CSR and ethics, tourism marketing, and social media marketing. Okay, and now I think for Pak Tony Prasetiantono, it's your time to have a speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Heni. Good morning, everybody. It is our pleasure to be here. In this session, let me discuss about the Indonesian economic development under VUCA. This is the new term named or called VUCA, V-U-C-A. VUCA is V is volatility, U is uncertainty, C is complexity, and A is ambiguity. Why we use this term? Because after the subprime mortgage crisis in US 2008, particularly after the Federal Reserve introduced what's so-called quantitative easing policy, which is printing money, 4.5 trillion US dollar to all over the world, and then global economic situation changing very fast. And it is very hard for most economists, including us, to predict what will happen in the future. For instance, so until now, I do not understand why U.S. people, U.S. citizens, elected Donald Trump rather than Hillary Clinton, for instance. Because from the economic point of view, it is clear that President Obama is considered a successful president. Particularly, he could come back the U.S. economy from deep crisis into the normal situation. So, for instance, during crisis, car sales in the U.S. dropped dramatically from 17 million to only 10.6 million units. But after 8 years, and then car sales in the U.S. come back to normal, even greater than 17 million units. It means that Obama is considered successful. This is car sales. How about Dow Jones Index? Dow Jones Industrial Index. Dow Jones Industrial Index in New York dropped dramatically from 17,000 to only 9,000 something. Particularly during, Lehman Brothers collapse in September 2009. Yeah, I think September 14. Today, September 14. September 14, 2009. 8 years ago. Dow Jones Industrial Index collapsed from 17,000 to become 99,000 something. Just before the election in the US, Dow Jones Industrial Index come back to even greater than 17,000. At that time, I think about 18,500. But surprisingly, with very impressive economic performance, it didn't mean anything for Hillary Clinton. And then Donald Trump surprisingly becoming president. And surprisingly also, the market reacted positively, and then finally eventually Dow Jones Index becoming greater and greater, bigger and bigger. I think the index right now is greater than 22,000. It is the record high of the New York Stock Exchange history. It is very hard to predict right now because many factors influence, very influential. So our capacity or capability to predict right now is very weak. For Indonesia particularly, it is very hard to predict, for instance, the oil price. The oil price fluctuated sharply. For instance, just before crisis, subprime mortgage crisis in 2007, oil price jumped from $70 per barrel, doubled to $147 per barrel, doubled within few months. It was a surprise. And I do remember at that time, some US economists predicted that sooner or later, oil price will achieve, let's say, $200 per barrel. You can imagine, $200 per barrel, oil price. It is unbelievable. However, what happened after 2013 particularly? Oil price declining sharply below $100 per barrel. And on February 2016, 1.5 years ago, oil price was only $27 per barrel. You can imagine. From 147 in 2007, and then last year only $27 per barrel. Some countries collapse, like Russia. Yeah. Foreign reserve in Russia dropped dramatically. Yeah. Foreign reserve in Malaysia also dropped dramatically. I think Malaysia lost about 40% of foreign reserves because of this situation. And the success story of U.S. economy, particularly after May 2013, U.S. economy come back to relatively normal. For instance, unemployment rate, when Barack Obama took his position as president, unemployment rate in U.S. increased dramatically from 4% to become 10%. Unemployment rate 10% in 2009. I always remember at that time, spring 2010, I was there in US. President Obama announced in spring 2010 that unemployment rate in the US economy hit the worst level at 10%. Under Obama administration, unemployment rate could be decreased gradually to 5% only. And today, unemployment rate in US is about 4.7%. It is very impressive. So I do not understand why Hillary Clinton failed to become the first woman to become US president. I think US should learn from Indonesia, that Indonesia has had a woman president in the past. But now, until now, US, they don't have any women president. So in this situation, in this regard, I think Indonesia is more advanced compared to US. In bahasa we call it US itu deso sebetulnya. Indonesia is more advanced. Okay. So for Indonesia, Indonesian economy survived during subprime mortgage crisis because of natural resources. To be honest, subprime mortgage crisis in 2008 basically based on the crisis in financial sector, particularly derivative transaction. In Indonesia, derivative transaction is very limited. Very beginning, Indonesia is latecomer in terms of derivative transactions. But we will survive from the crisis because we are very latecomer in derivative transactions. Thanks God that's Indonesia in terms of this regard. We are still very beginner. Our involvement in these transactions, derivative transactions, is very limited. Not like Singapore, for instance. Singapore or Hong Kong or some financial centers in Asia involving derivative, they collapse because of subprime mortgage crisis. So, lesson learned from this situation. Thanks God that we are very beginner in this transaction. On the other hand, we are very pleased that we have what's so-called natural-based economy. Because of increasing price of natural resource commodity prices like coal, tin, rubber, and then Indonesian economy survive. However, dependency on these commodity prices, of course, could not be maintained anymore, or we have to become more diversified in our economy. we have to strengthen our manufacturing sector rather than rely only on commodity prices. Yeah. I think President Jokowi realized the situation. That's why he tries to speed up our manufacturing development. Yeah. The role of manufacturing sector in Indonesia declining gradually. And first for the President Jokowi is try to speed up the infrastructure development to catch up our neighboring countries, yeah, to catch up Malaysia particularly, because in terms of infrastructure, I think Malaysia could be considered as superior in this region. Yeah, of course outside Singapore. Yeah, Malaysia more advanced in terms of infrastructure compared to, for instance, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Yeah. This year, President Jokowi spent about 387 trillion rupiah for infrastructure development, and the next year it will be increased to 409 trillion rupiah, compared to our total government budget, about 2,200 trillion rupiah. Infrastructure spending is considered second rank after the education spending. By law, by constitution, the government, it is compulsory for the government to spend about 20% of our budget for education purposes. 20% meaning 440 trillion rupiah for education sector. So infrastructure now is the second rank after education. So I think this government is now on the right track to achieve greater economic growth. As you know that our economic growth, Indonesia's economic growth right now is only 5%, still below our target. At least Indonesia, I think ideally we have to achieve at least 6%, and the most ideal one is 7%. Why 7%? Because with 7% economic growth, we can absorb about 2.5 million new labor force, new employment. So with 7% of economic growth, and then we can combat unemployment problem. At least we absorb the new employment, the new labor force coming to the market. With only 5% economic growth, meaning that we can only absorb most of them, but still maybe more than 500,000 people, 500,000 employment, still unemployed, no jobs, or they involved in informal sector. That's why informal sector in Indonesia is now getting bigger and bigger. I think this is not an ideal world, because informal sector, they have very limited, particularly in value added. Yeah. They absorb many people, but unluckily, in terms of value added, they are very inferior. Yeah. So, come back to infrastructure. I think all of us now, we are very exciting to wait our MRT, mass rapid transit in Jakarta. Yeah. The budget for infrastructure development for MRT in Jakarta is about 30 trillion rupiah. 30 trillion rupiah, 30 trillion rupiah. For comparison, in 2014, at the end of SBY's administration and the beginnings of Jokowi's administration, the subsidy for energy was amounted 350 trillion rupiah. You can imagine, 350 rupiah, 350 trillion rupiah. Our budget allocated for only energy subsidy. It consisted of 250 trillion rupiah for fuel consumption subsidy, and 100 trillion rupiah for electricity subsidy, PLN, perusahaan listrik negara, electricity state company. So altogether 350 trillion rupiah for energy subsidy. For comparison, the MRT cost in Jakarta only 30 trillion rupiah. It is very huge amount for subsidy. And Pak Jokowi, I think, is a lucky president in this regard, because when he took his position as president at the end of 2014, and then oil price declining gradually. In this regard, I think Pak Jokowi is lucky. However, unluckily for him, global economic situation is changing very fast, and greater uncertainty, particularly in the US economy, because US economy is still unpredictable, particularly under Donald Trump's administration. Nobody knows what Donald Trump is now thinking. Even though Donald Trump is graduated from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, but what he is thinking is doubtful and unpredictable. So maybe the best thing is US should have another president, in my opinion. Okay, time will tell. We don't know what Donald Trump will do regarding protectionism. Because Donald Trump tried to persuade China to reduce the trade surplus, China's trade surplus against US. Of course, from this perspective, I think it's not easy for Donald Trump to convince China to reduce the surplus. So the only possibility for Trump right now is combating huge deficit through protectionism. If this situation occurs, and then we come back to the era of before WTO, World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization established since January 1st, 1995. If protectionism happen again, and then we come back to 1994. So we don't know about our future regarding this trade relationship between US and China. Another problem is Brexit. UK withdrew from European Union. The future of European economy, I think, is still cloudy. The future of UK, the future of Eurozone, the future of Greece economy, the future of Turkey, the future of Spain, Italy, most of them are cloudy. Even Chinese economy also, in some extent, I think also cloudy, because their economic growth right now is still below 7%. For China, it is uncommon to have only 6.7%, 6.8% economic growth, because normally economic growth in China was double-digit economic growth in the period of 2001 to 2008. Yeah, maybe normally Chinese economy should grow, let's say, at least 7%, or maybe 9%, 8%, 9%. But the weakening Chinese economy also impacting a lot for Indonesia particularly, because we export some natural resources to China, particularly coal. Yeah. So that's the situation. That's why Indonesia only grew 5%. Let me talk about one concern regarding Indonesian economy is inequality. Now, some people right now concerned on some issues in Indonesia. One is about inequality. The concern is like this. It is interestingly in Indonesia that our Gini ratio, Gini coefficient, increase gradually from 0.3 something to become 0.4. Many politicians criticizing Pak Jokowi, of course, it is a good time to criticize Pak Jokowi, I think, from this point of view. Previously, our Gini ratio increased to above 0.4, meaning that greater inequality in Indonesia. But according to our textbooks, particularly Simon Kuznets, it is normal for every country, particularly developing countries, or in the case of Indonesia, emerging country like Indonesia, when Indonesia growing fast, and then at the same time, our inequality widening. Our economy growing fast, and then this is the trade-off between economic growth and inequality. Greater economic growth, greater inequality. Most people assume that greater economic growth meaning greater or better Gini ratio, but in fact not. Interestingly, in 1998, Indonesia was suffering. Yeah, Indonesia was suffering because of Asian financial crisis. Economic growth at that time minus 13.7%. It was the worst situation in our economic history. Economic growth minus 13.7%, and our inflation rate was 78%. Rupiah depreciated sharply from 2,300 rupiah per US to become 17,000 rupiah per US. It was the worst situation. However, interestingly, our Gini index, how about our Gini index? Constant, improving, or getting worse? Our Gini index improved a lot. Meaning, if you want to improve our Gini index, and then let our country involved in crisis. That's makes sense, because during crisis, many rich people, unluckily, their income dropped dramatically. And then the distance between poor people level and rich people becoming narrowing. The gap becoming narrowing. On the other hand, if our economy growing very fast, and then our inequality getting worse and worse. Interestingly, that this is the Simon Kuznets hypothesis. Yeah, economic growing. Yeah, and then inequality getting worse, but after the top level, and then our inequality becoming, our Gini index becoming better and better, right? Interestingly, in Indonesia right now, that's our Gini index. Our current Gini index right now is 0.393. 0.393. Meaning our Gini index is getting better. My question is it the ideal one or not? Okay, by definition, our Gini ratio right now is better. But the story behind this number is clearly that it is not a good situation because our economic growth only 5%, still below our target 6% or even greater than 6%. I don't think that this situation will be sustainable, because when Indonesian economy grow faster, and then our Gini ratio will come back to 0.4%, 0.4. Interestingly, that Singapore, our neighbor, can you imagine Singapore? Gini ratio in Singapore much greater than Indonesia, 0.45. That's Singapore. How about China? Surprisingly for us, Gini ratio in China right now 0.5. How to explain the situation? Yeah. Sometimes, in my opinion, it is insufficient to know only the number, the index. We have to explore the story behind the number. The index, the number, is one thing, but the explanation, the story behind the number is necessary to be understood. Meaning that 0.4 Gini index is, for me, is still normal. Yeah, but of course we have to push the government to make some initiatives to combat our worsening Gini index. But 0.4 for Indonesia, for a country like Indonesia, emerging country, I think still normal. 0.4 is still normal, right? I think our neighboring countries, including Malaysia, also their Gini index also. I think, for instance, China is in this data still 0.42, but it was in 2012. But now Gini index greater than 0.42 and close to 5, close to 0.5. Even US, there is inequality 0.46%. But I do believe with some consistent policies, particularly spending much for infrastructure and then spending much for education, and also try to push what's so-called financial inclusion, I think our Gini index will be better. Yeah. Financial inclusion means how to make people easily access the financial sector, formal financial sector like banking sector. In Indonesia, financial inclusion is really hard to achieve because, for instance, now in Indonesia we have 180 118 commercial banks. It is considered too many. Compared to Singapore, they only have 3 giant commercial banks. Compared to Malaysia, they only have 8 commercial banks, yeah, like Maybank and CIMB. In Singapore, they have 3 giants: DBS, OCBC, and UOB. In Indonesia, we have 118 commercial banks. That's too many. Because in the banking sector, in the financial sector, there is an adagium: size does matter. The bigger the size, the more efficient. The bigger the size of the bank, the more stable in terms of capital requirement, in terms of capital adequacy ratio. So, Pak Jokowi, I think, should take an initiative to consolidate our 118 commercial banks to become, let's say, less than 50 commercial banks. Because in the tight competition, bank require greater capital. Yeah. With greater capital, and then during bad time, during difficult time, during the crisis, we could survive during crisis because of capital requirement, because they have a lot of capital, much of capital, and then we can survive because it is more stable for the commercial banks experiencing turbulent times. Okay, let me conclude my discussion. Oh yeah, this one is how to combat our inequality. I think we have to speed up, or we have to grow more than our level, our current level now, 5%. Ideally, we have to achieve 7% growth. In Asian countries, ASEAN countries, sorry to say, only Vietnam and the Philippines achieving 7%. But during difficult time right now, uncertainty time, economic growth in Vietnam and the Philippines also less than 7%. Yeah, less than 7%. And then we have to speed up our infrastructure development, because Indonesia needs to, to reduce what's so-called logistic costs. Logistics costs in Indonesia is really a big problem. Yeah, we have to, we have to reduce our ICOR. ICOR is incremental capital output ratio. Compared to other ASEAN nations, ASEAN countries, Indonesia still considered as relatively high incremental capital output ratio. With sound infrastructure reliability, I think we have to catch up ICOR like neighboring countries at 3 or maybe less than 3 incremental capital output ratio. And then regarding human capital, I think we have to speed up our level of education and also the education quality. Yeah. It is interesting that students going overseas from Indonesia right now still rank number 3 in ASEAN countries. Number 1 is Malaysia. Number 2 is, surprisingly for us, Vietnam. And the 3rd rank is Indonesia. So I think we should speed up. Yeah, we should. The government now, they have what's so-called LPDP program. LPDP program is like scholarship for young people of Indonesia to go abroad. Yeah. In this opportunity, I also encourage all of you young people to go abroad. Yeah. Study in US and UK, Australia. I think it's better for you, because going abroad meaning that you will involve in tough competition. Tough competition with whom? Tough competition against Chinese students. Tough competition against Indian students, South Korean students. Really tough. Yeah. So you have to go. Yeah, you have to go. And then health and inclusion. Yeah, of course. We have the program of BPJS. BPJS is the Indonesian version of social security. I think it is a good idea. Financial inclusion, as I mentioned earlier, the problem of Indonesia is how to about the penetration of formal banking sector into remote areas. I think it's not easy. Yeah, it takes time for financial inclusion. Financial inclusion in Indonesia, of course, much different with compared to Singapore. Yeah, it is very easy for Singapore to achieve financial inclusion. For Malaysia, maybe it's also not really hard. But Indonesia, I think, because we have so many islands, we have so many remote areas. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, but it is very challenging for Pak Jokowi and his team. And finally, I also asked about the greater roles of civil society, because I think it's very hard for the government to cover everything. Social security should be active also, involved also in some areas, and also what's called P, public-private partnership. Yeah, there is a close relationship between the public sector and private sector. Yeah. Because Indonesia, we have so many problems. Yeah, education problem, financial, social inclusion, health problem, infrastructure, many things. I think it's too hard for the government to combat everything. So we have to ask the involvement or participation of the private sector as well as social society to involve and combating everything. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Pak Tony have to leave now. So probably if you have questions for Pak Tony, you can save and you can send to the committee, and then we send to Pak Tony for the answers. And thank you very much, Pak Tony, for coming to conference. All right, we will move to the next speaker. Please, Professor Juliet Willetts, it's your time now. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Selamat pagi, Bapak dan Ibu yang terhormat. I'm learning Bahasa Indonesia, but I was very relieved when I was informed that I could present in English to you today. Not yet at the standard to be able to present in a formal situation. So I'm Juliet Willetts. I'm from the Institute for Sustainable Futures, which is at the University of Technology in Sydney. And our institute has a mission to create change towards sustainable futures. So I think that it's a very relevant mission to the theme of this conference, which is focused on sustainable development. So I wanted to start this presentation. It's focused on making the most of the opportunity that the SDGs offer here in Indonesia. And obviously, you all know much more about Indonesia than I do. I'm an outsider. I'm someone who has worked here and in other parts of the Asia Pacific. But I hope that I can offer you some ideas from my external perspective. So I wanted to start this presentation with a story. So this gentleman in the photo, his name is Pak Koen Irianto, and he is a leader of an association in East Java that is focused on using business principles and supporting small-scale enterprises to help provide access to people living in poorer and more remote areas to sanitation. And he's a very, very inspiring character. So we met him through a research process, and we started to call him our sanitation hero. So he was someone who was, had a legal background, so very well educated, understood business principles, and had a very strong sense of social responsibility. And that combination was what was leading him to develop this association, to support many, many new enterprises to start, that all also had a sense of social responsibility in the way that they operated. And so this example, I hope you will see how in this presentation he exemplifies the kinds of ideas which I want to convey to you today. So the key messages in this presentation. So firstly, that the Sustainable Development Goals themselves are very important, and I will speak a little bit about them. But what's more important is that we work on them in a holistic way and are clear about the interconnections and integration across them. The second one, about a key role that small-scale enterprises can play to help achieve the goals, but that we also need to pay attention to the social and the environmental outcomes. And the third one, which is really focused on the opportunity that Indonesia has to jump ahead of the ways that things are done in some other countries, including my own, and to support that by doing research and creating an evidence base through a form of research that involves key stakeholders, policymakers, practitioners, members of society. So those are the three areas that I will talk about this morning. So the first one, the focus on the SDGs and the importance of the interconnections. So first of all, the SDGs, they provide us a common platform. So 200 countries around the world have signed and agreed we are going to try and achieve these goals, even though they may be ambitious. And in generating that agreement across so many countries and within so many countries through a very long participatory process, then we have a direction to move in. But there are also many criticisms of the Sustainable Development Goals. One criticism is that the focus within the goals on economic growth and sustainability doesn't really get to the heart of how those two are coupled. There are critics who say that there is not enough focus on the changes we need to make to the way we are extracting and we are consuming. Another criticism is that they don't have a focus on a power analysis of, well, how did we get in the situation we are now, where we're overusing resources and where there is larger inequalities globally. And a third criticism is that maybe they don't have enough accountability attached. It's too easy to pick and choose. Maybe I want to achieve this goal and this target, but I will ignore the others, they're too hard. And that the accountability mechanisms of just having voluntary reporting, that maybe we don't have enough teeth to this agenda. But still, it's an agenda, and as I said in the title of my presentation, I see it as an opportunity, and I think we can use it if we approach it critically. And approaching it critically, one of the ways to think about that is a conceptualization of the goals that was developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, and they make clear that there are different layers and ideas embedded in these goals, and that we need to first think about what the planetary boundaries are in terms of climate change, in terms of the way we are using land and resources, in the terms of life under the water as well as on the land. And then the next layer up is more about how we operate our societies, about inequality, gender inequality, and about peace and security. And then the third level up is the economy and how we can support those things to happen in society and to preserve the planet. So their conceptualization puts the planetary boundaries as most important, because if we go past those boundaries, then there is no possibility for social justice, there's no possibility for a prosperous economy, neither here in Indonesia nor in other countries. So then I'd like to take goal 6 just as an example of the interconnections. So Goal 6 has a focus firstly on basic human rights, which is about access to drinking water and to safely manage sanitation. So two obvious things that we would agree that everyone in the globe should have access to. But then the other targets show the things we need in place in order to have these two targets. So we need to do something about wastewater problems and the contamination and the water quality issues that currently happen because we are not appropriately dealing with wastewater. There is also, underneath that, thinking about whether we can use our water resources more wisely. What can we do in terms of efficiencies and being clear that we're not taking more water than the speed at which it is replenished. We also then need to think about the wider integrated resources management. How are we allocating water for agriculture, for domestic use? And underneath that, if we don't protect and restore the ecosystems, then we won't have clean water to allocate to any of those purposes. So that shows you some of the interconnections and how we end up back down at, well, we need to really be looking after the resources, otherwise we can't have these other purposes fulfilled. There are also linkages to other different goals. If we have poverty, then maybe people are not able to pay for services. Maybe they're living too remotely to have access to services. In terms of gender equality, there are questions about who is making decisions about who has access to services and the ways in which services are provided. And often it is women's roles that relate to water and sanitation, but often their voice is very low in comparison. In terms of Goal 17, which is on partnerships, the only way we can achieve all these targets for Goal 6 is if we have partnerships, as we heard earlier from Bapak, that we need to be working across the government, civil society and the private sector to achieve any of these. And equally, in urban areas, there is Goal 11 focused on urbanization. How can we have integrated urban water management as part of the way that cities are designed? And I have some examples later on about this idea. So for Goal 6, there is a lot needed here in Indonesia, and some of these numbers I hope to alarm you because they show us actually what the situation is in terms of some very, very basic human needs and rights here in Indonesia. So we have that 2015, which is when the baseline for the SDGs was conducted, that 1 in 8 people do not have access to an improved water source, which means that the source may be contaminated. It's going to lead to illness. And beneath that, a study done here in Yogyakarta, which showed that 2 out of 3 samples of water, both at the point of drinking and at the source, were contaminated. So this is because we're not managing what is happening in terms of sanitation and our water supply. We also have that in rural areas, there is 29% of people who are not using a toilet at all. So these start to show us why we have the point on the bottom right, which is very high levels of malnutrition and stunting. So these are important problems that we need to solve. We heard earlier about the importance of infrastructure development. So one of the types of infrastructure is in relation to water and sanitation. That is really a key need. And there's not just work to do in Indonesia. So in Australia also, we also have many issues to be faced. And now that the Sustainable Development Goals, which different to the MDGs, they also apply to developed countries. And that's prompted a lot of people to take a better look at Australia and Indigenous peoples within Australia, and to realise that their access to water and sanitation and their health and life expectancy is much lower than the general population. So it's pointing out issues here in Australia, in many different countries. So then moving on to my second point, which is about small-scale enterprise and what role they could play and how they might be valuable towards achieving sustainable development. So these next few slides are based around a research project which we have been running for the last 4 years. It's been in partnership with UGM here and also with Plan International and funded through the Australian Aid Program. So we did some initial research, literature review globally to try and understand the enablers and the constraints of these small-scale enterprises and the different roles that they were playing to help provide basic services. And then we went into 3 different countries, Vietnam, Indonesia and Timor-Leste, for much more detailed research. And I'll speak to just a few of the studies here in Indonesia. So here in Indonesia, there were 3 main studies. One which was a political economy analysis, trying to understand what is the environment for these small-scale businesses, what ways are they being supported or undermined by the broader political economy. We did a value chain analysis with very detailed GIS mapping of how you could supply toilets to very rural areas. And then we did a study on motivations, drivers and barriers, trying to better understand the mentality of the people in these small enterprises. So just a few highlights of the findings. From the political economy analysis, we found that there are many constraints to how these small-scale enterprises are able to play roles. So local governments play a key role in setting the environment in which the small-scale enterprises work, but they were very unclear if or how they could or should be supporting the small-scale private sector. And then the next point below was that it was mostly the line agencies to do with water and sanitation that were wondering, what should we do? Whereas the Department of SMEs has the skills, the mandate to help support small-scale enterprise, but we found they were only focused on businesses such as snacks or those that lead directly to economic development. They weren't interested or weren't looking at perhaps supporting a small-scale enterprise that was building toilets. It wasn't top of their list. We also found communities sometimes were mistrusting of the private sector. And so this all created an environment that was quite difficult. And we found that the enterprises had needs in training, in business management, and the biggest barrier was about gaining access to finance. And we heard earlier about that also as a challenge. So this showed us the broader environment. And then the next study was focused, as I said, on reaching rural areas. And what we found through a value chain study was that places that had the highest costs also had the highest levels of poverty. So if we have that situation, then we need to do something about it. We need strategies to reduce those costs. Otherwise, we're going to continue to systematically exclude certain members of society, and we're not going to be able, to decrease inequality and to ensure people have access to basic services. And we can't expect that small-scale private sector, it's not attractive for them to go to a place where people don't have the ability to pay. So we had a big discussion on this in Kupang, on these results, where the provincial government, really started to take on that we need very differential policies to ensure that we can support private sector to play a role, but it may need to be subsidised or cross-subsidised between more remote and less remote areas. And then moving on to the study which focused on the motivations of these different enterprises. This showed some very positive findings, I think, if we're thinking about sustainable development. So we find that a large proportion of the leaders of small-scale water enterprises, so providing piped water services to communities, that they were socially minded, and that a large proportion of their customers were poor. And they reported many different types of motivations that led to wanting to serve everybody. And equally the same story amongst small-scale businesses selling toilets and installing toilets. They were often offering installment payments, different ways to make it easier for those who are less able to pay. So across the study we found many different types of motivations. Definitely profit was there, but there were also this sense of social purpose, an interest in social networks, religious beliefs. All of these things were contributing to them not just putting profit first, but also having other aims in the way they ran their business. One issue that came up, so we heard that Indonesia is advanced compared to America in terms of gender equality, but perhaps not amongst the small-scale enterprises that we were able to interview so far. So we found that women were very underrepresented, and in regards to water enterprises, they were present, but often playing administrative roles rather than leadership roles. So it's a question about how we can support better equality in terms of women's role in these enterprises and women's ability to take up the economic opportunity that they offer. So lastly, moving to my final message, which is about the opportunity for Indonesia to jump ahead and to think about doing things in different ways that are different from the path taken by other countries. So I'm using examples, I realize many from the water sector, that's my area of research, but I hope the ideas are translatable to other sectors. So in terms of water, the International Water Association and many people working on the issue of water are realizing we can't just think about it in a linear sense anymore, that we have a water supply, we use it, and then we dispose of it, and end of story. The thinking is really changing, and this, as I say, also applies for resources, for managing other systems in our society, that we need to think about a circular economy, which is how we reuse things at much smaller scales and how we distribute our infrastructure rather than having a very big system in an urban area with a big water supply and then it's used and then it's disposed maybe into the sea or into rivers. We need to think about much smaller cycles, how we can recycle even within apartment buildings, how we can think about recovering the nutrients that are in that water to be reused for agriculture, how we can recover energy from the waste products. So an example from Sydney, this is a building which is across the road from the university where I work, which has many of these features. So they are collecting rainwater and stormwater that is recycled and reused in the building. As you can see, they have these green walls where they're using some of this water. It has a cogeneration, electricity generation. So it's about thinking about doing things differently and closing the loops and having a circular economy on a much smaller scale. And here in Indonesia, where you don't yet have some of the bigger infrastructure investments already made, there's much more opportunity to think about how to do things in an innovative way. The second opportunity, I think, builds from studies here, which is that we do have many socially minded people here in Indonesia and amongst the private sector, and there's a real opportunity to think about how we support the idea of social enterprises as a way to achieve sustainable development. And then lastly, as a researcher, I feel that research and evidence have a very important place in the whole picture of sustainable development, but we need to question what kind of research we're doing and how best it impacts change. So here we have 3 examples. Traditional disciplinary research, where we just know about our own discipline. The second example, which is when we are mixing up more than one discipline in terms of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research, but still remaining within academia. And then the bottom example, which is transdisciplinary research, which is the type of research that our institute does and which we really promote. And that type of research has stakeholders in terms of policymakers or other actors as critical parts in the research process. We try and answer questions that they bring, we try and engage them in the process of doing the research so that there is ownership of the findings and that we're not just doing research in a vacuum and then hoping someone might read it one day in a journal. Instead, we're doing it in a very engaged way because we want that research to create change now, because we need the changes now. So that concludes my presentation. In summary, I've talked about the interconnections across the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to be very conscious of working on them. The importance of small-scale enterprise and how they are supported. And lastly, the opportunities that Indonesia has to do things differently and to use the opportunity that is right here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Juliet. Probably we will continue with Dr. Salmi first, and then after that we will open for the questions. Please, your time now, Dr. Salmi. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Very good morning. You still have time to bear with me for a couple of minutes? Okay. Since I'm the last speaker, I think our first speaker and second speaker has presented to you with facts and figures, what's going on, and about the vulnerabilities, the turbulence economics, and perhaps what we can do regarding the business, regarding the sustainable development. All right, okay. And like the second speaker mentions, there is many critics actually regarding this sustainable development. But however, I believe whether we are a business leader or we are an individual, we do have our own roles regarding the sustainable development, right? Okay, I'm from Universitas Malaysia and from Graduate School of Business, and actually we at the business school, we really wanted our business leaders, especially our graduates, to embed the element of sustainability when they graduate. So basically, our credo of our business school is about nurturing business sustainability. Right. I still remember when I did my Ph.D. Quite some time ago, when we do research to get the literature regarding corporate social responsibility, anything about CSR, anything about sustainability, it's very difficult those days. But nowadays, things have changed. I mean, many research, alright, because with your own discipline or interdisciplinary studies, people are talking about sustainability. Why is it so important? And when we're talking about business as well, business managers also talking about sustainability. In Malaysia, especially for the private public listed company, they need to come out with reports regarding social reporting. So when we talk about social reporting, it's very closely much related with sustainable development. Okay, right. Okay, I think we have introduced my biography earlier on, and actually I'm also very much interested to do research when we're talking about sustainability. All right, so we can discuss many things about sustainability or business development, but I try to focus about what are the role of the sustainability leadership. All right. The two speakers have shared with you quite a hardcore data about business, about sustainable development. Let me bring back to you to the fundamental or the core knowledge about what is it mean by sustainable development, what does it mean by sustainability. Sometimes people get confused. Even when we talk about the definition of CSR, corporate social responsibility, most of us, most companies, they may have their own operational definition based on their needs of the company, based on the company's visions and mission. So can we have a consensus, a same definition when we talk about sustainability? Can we have the same definition when we talk about sustainable development? Because we want to move forward together. Can we have that? So what are the important elements that we need to have before we change, before we move it forward to achieve the same objective? Right? Okay. Alright, so this is basically what I'm trying to share with you about the introductions to SD, that's Sustainable Development, and what is the relationship between sustainability and also business, alright? And last but not least, I think the most important, about the people, about the leadership, alright? Okay, what is sustainable development? And like I mentioned to you earlier on, when we talk about XD, it's something very broad, and it should be interdisciplinary, filled with many niche areas. So what are the areas? Right? And when we talk about the definition about this concept of XD, sometimes industries seem to speak a different language to one another. Alright, so but I try to bring into a very basic understanding what is it mean by XD. Alright, actually, when we talk about SD, it's basically the development which meets the needs of the current generations without we compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. It means that what we have here, our great-great-grandchildren should have the same thing what we have it here. So this is our responsibility and our accountability. We are accountable to make sure this. So that's why we need to have the sustainable development. But to achieve the goals, they may incur a long process. They may need to engage with many stakeholders, alright, whether it's internal stakeholder or also external stakeholders. Right. Okay. And the most important is that when we're facing a problem, when we're facing issues, sometimes the problem, these issues is within our control. We can't control, especially what had happened with Donald Trump in the States, what had happened with the Brexit. For our Asian market, sometimes we can't control these issues, right? But we can do our part here. So basically, we need to go back to the simple principle about sustainability. We need to actually balance the key. The important keywords here is about balancing. We need to balance between society, economy, and also the environment. Can you hear me? Right, okay. Alright. And again, the first speaker is talking about the 3 P's. What are the 3 P's? Just now? What are the 3 P's just now? Public, private, partnership. Alright. I'm also talking about the 3 P's here, which is people, philanthropy, and also planet. The 3 P's that he says, Tony mentions this morning is actually the same thing that we actually need to interreliant. Alright? It means that society depends on the economy, and the economy actually depends on the global ecosystem. We as an Asian market, we can't work by our own. We still need to depend what had happened outside of the world. Alright? So, and who's have represent the ultimate bottom line? Okay, when we talk about sustainable development, we actually illustrate the triple bottom line. So that's why Prof have done very good research regarding water, right? And that one is a basic necessity needs for everybody, regardless you are top management or you are on the normal society, so you still need to have a good water treatment, right? So basically, these 3 P's needs to be interreliant, right? Okay, so what is exactly sustainability, alright? Again, I'll repeat this one. Okay, the most important, we also need to understand why firms or businesses engage in sustainability. Why they feel this is very important, alright? Is that an option for the business to not actually engage with sustainability? Alright. We have a lot of issues regarding, I just take an example regarding McDonald's issues recently in Korea, pricing issues. It's not only that, it's about obesity, right? So one of the issues. So if let's say this company, have a lot of pressure from the stakeholders regarding that particular issue, if they not react upon that issue, what will happen to the business? So that's why firms must engage with sustainability. They adopt sustainable business practices because they believe it is a responsible and ethical thing to do. And the most important, the one piece is about profit. So at the end of the day, business still want to earn profit. We want to give back to the society. Definitely you must have something to give it back. Without having anything, can you give it back to the society? And we also must remember when we talk about business, we have stakeholders, we also have shareholders. We also, as a business, we need to also fulfill the shareholder needs, right? So that's why, no matter what, business still need to earn profit. So, however, along the way, to earn profits, can they forego about any other things? Can they just let go what happened to the environment? Right? So these are the process that firm really need to think carefully how they can move forward with many challenges. What has happened nowadays, right? Okay. So why business leader believe on sustainable development? Okay. Why I keep saying about belief? If you don't believe, can you do something? It's very hard, right? So you must believe, then you can moving forward. You must have a confidence to actually do uncertainty, especially nowadays with a limited cost, with economy is very good. As a business leaders, they must be very careful with any kind of investment, with any kind of movement, or many kind of decision making. They have to make sure that is a very wise decision making. So we need to actually make the business leader believe why is it so important about sustainable development. First and foremost, we need to actually tell them with the SD they actually cut the cost. Alright? Okay. And we can also mitigate risk, and they can generate revenue. But the most important thing I think with the sustainability, actually people have forgot these are one of the key components that can actually drive innovations. Alright. For example, if you know like Apple, Steve Jobs, he started from a very small garage until he can produce something about Apple. Okay? So why make him do that? Because he is thinking about the futures. Alright? It is drive him to do some innovations. And again, we are talking about Uber, Grab car. Uber doesn't have any taxis, but they are actually the biggest taxi provider in the world. So this kind of innovation come into place where they think about the sustainable development. Go back to the earlier on definition about what is it mean by SD. It means that you want to sustain your business not only today, but in the long run. And of course, improve employee development and retention. I also want to work with a company that have actually, for sure, that can give me a good benefit in the long run. Sometimes, even though you are not happy working in the company, if let's say your welfare has been taken care, alright, you have a good salary, you have a good bonus, sometimes you don't like it, you're willing to actually stay with the organization. So this is something that gives benefit to the organizations. Right. Okay. I love to talk more about this innovation in relation to ST, because with the innovations, because we have to understand now land is very limited. When we talk about money to invest, even though you have heard about so many good things about Malaysia just now from the first speaker, but actually we also facing a lot of difficulties recently. What you have with the political issues, with the economics issues, I think everyone on this earth nowadays facing the same problem. It's not only from the top management, even even as a normal society, we introduced GXT, all right? And I think it's good for some economic part, but again, many others are also being affected with this introducing of GXT. And again, so when come back to innovations, what does we can do with this innovation? Like what I said, that the land is limited, but we still need to have the development. We still need to chop up the tree to build up the new buildings, to build up the infrastructures. We have recently launched our MRT from KL Center to Sungai Buloh. So of course, along the way, along the progressing, many other things need to sacrifice, being sacrificed. And I come from the Penang Island. Have you been to USL? Right, it's a beautiful island. If you notice, sorry, promoting Penang Island. Alright, so if you notice that if you go to Penang 5 years ago, we only have one Penang Bridge, and now we already have second Penang Bridge. And they are actually now would like to develop another tunnel from island to the mainland. But of course, for some NGOs, from some environmentalists, this is something which is not good for the environment. But we still need to go for this kind of development to lay out a good infrastructure. I still remember, I stay in the mainland, every day I just need to use one bridge. It took me, my home is just nearby to the bridge. It is actually, without the traffic jam, it only took me about 70 minutes, but every day I have to go into the traffic jam more than an hour. So when we talking about sustainability, is it good to be caught in the traffic jam? You are actually producing more carbon monoxide and it will pollute to the environment. So government trying to find a way how we can actually reduce the traffic jam. But again, when we want to reduce the traffic jam again, we need to develop more infrastructure. When we develop the more infrastructure, then we have to, of course, one day Penang Island will become more closer to the mainland. Because they are doing the development, so something need to sacrifice along the way. But however, we hope that with the innovation, sustainability potential to create opportunity for companies to tweak or radically improve their products, the way they do things, and actually to reduce the environmental impacts, often by delivering the new features and benefits. We are going to the sustainable development, but we try not to actually overdoing things. With the innovations, we hope that we can help to reduce the environmental impacts at least. Right? Okay. And I think this is some of the sustainability roles and engagement in the real business. These are the 5 factors that normally have been taken care in order to achieve the corporate sustainability. First and foremost, about the strategy. You need to have a very clear strategy why you need to engage in the sustainability, and of course, your financial. You want to sustain the good returns for the shareholder, as I mentioned in the beginning. All right, and also about the customer and product. You want to sustain your customer, no matter how good your product it is. If you can't actually sustain your customer, there's no point. Right, so you want to have a repeat purchase, you want to have a customer to return back to get the products. And I think the most important about the governance and the stakeholders. So most of the company, they're not doing very well because there must be something problem with the internal, about the corporate governance. So the 4th point, for me, I think is also very important in order to make sure that you actually achieve your sustainable development. And last but not least, apart of these all factors, I think the most factors is about human. You have a good machine, you have a good infrastructure, you have a good policy, but if you fail to actually develop human capital, I think this is harmful to any organization, even to any country. Am I right? So that's why Pak Tony actually mentions early on, Indonesian government is actually trying, he also suggested just now to actually look on the development of education. And he did mention that Malaysian, we send our students to study abroad, that was those days. But nowadays also, I think the numbers is keep increasing. Because of what? With the Brexit, with the currency, and we can't afford to actually send our students abroad. But we have to make sure this. Because we have to develop the human capital, right? So why is it important? Okay, so it comes back to my main focus here, human and leadership. Why is sustainability leadership? When we talk about leadership, of course, we need to have people which need to lead. All right. When we talk about sustainability leadership, is actually embrace the triple bottom line concept, the 3 P's just now. Right? So it is actually a mindful actions and behavior which is embracing a global worldview to recognize the connection between the planet and also the humanity, right? Through the personal and organizational choice of positive environmental and social change. Another keyword here is change. When we talk about sustainability leadership, we can't avoid to having a change, right? Okay. So, my personal view, based on some reading, some research, I think these are the 5 roles of sustainability leadership. First, leaders. When I'm talking about leaders, we are not just thinking about general manager, we are not talking about managers, we are talking about ourselves. You here, I'm here is also leaders for your own institution, for at least your own organization, or for your own self. You are leaders to yourself. So one of the 5 roles. First, you need to understand the interconnection of the system. As the leaders, you need to know what had happened. With the data that has been provided by the first speaker and the second speaker, actually we need to digest and make things what we call how to move forward with this kind of data. So we need to understand what's going on outside the world. Even though we are in this region, to moving forward, we must know what's going on outside. With the technologies, nowadays everything within your fingertips. So as a good leader, to make sure that you come up with what had happened outside the world, you need to understand and make everything interconnection between the system. Right? We also need to think globally toward the future. Like Asian people especially, we are too sentimental of being local, right? So normally, if let's say you have KFC and also McDonald's. If you go to Malaysia, we have different flavors. If you go to Korea, it's different flavor. If you go to UK, it's a different flavor. And some of the menus was not offered on the plate. So that's why, as a business, they need to think globally for them to move it forward. But they have to act locally in order to gain belief and trust from other stakeholders, right? So, and another thing is, I think the most important thing is to protect the nature and people. Like water, once it has contaminated, nothing much that we can do. I still remember when I was small, those days, I can still go to the park and then just drinking water like that. Nowadays, I don't dare to allow my kids to actually doing that. So, alright, everything is, drastically, it's just about 10 years ago, but now everything has changed. So something that we need to protect the nature and also, of course, the people. People is our assets for the nations to moving forward. People is our asset for the organizations to moving forward. And of course, to transform business as usual. Like say, business need to have an element of innovations They can't do things as what they do it now. Alright, remember Alibaba? They are the biggest retailers company without having any stocks. So that's why we need to have this to transform business as usual in order to go for sustainable development. And again, as a leader, the most important is to lead by the example. Alright, so you must do what you have preached. As a leader, you must show an example. So I think these are the most important role for the sustainability leadership. Right. Okay. Right. To summary, I think these are the take-home notes. I think that is very important. We have to actually change. I think I also need to agree, like most of us have stayed in this comfort zone for quite some time. Now, in order to move forward, I think we need some change, right? But the question is whether your organization is ready to change toward the SD, toward the sustainability, or are the business leader, him or herself, or ourselves, is actually ready to go for change. Right? With that, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Salmi. Now it's time for questions and comments.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Pande. I'm from Universitas Dr. Salmi, I would like to cover your style first. I'm going to promote my university first. Universitas Singapura Karawang is actually a new state-owned university locating 4 kilometers to the east of Jakarta. Yes, and I have some questions here. Well, actually, I was aiming to give the question to Dr. Tony Prasetiantono, but he had to catch his flight to Jakarta. But I think there's actually a good connection between what I was going to ask to him, and now I'm going to address these questions to both of you, Professor Willetts and Dr. Salmi. What I could get from you. And the first one is about sustainable development, and then Tony mentioned something about VUCA, and then you mentioned something about Professor Willetts mentioned something about the future opportunities for developing countries, and then Dr. Salmi, you presented something related to the CSR and the role of being effective leader. And yeah, the thing is that when we're talking about development, we're talking about the development of technology, and when we're talking about technology, from what I heard and from what being discussed in the seminar I attended in Bank Indonesia a couple of weeks ago, there was actually like a discussion about the threat of technology towards the extinction of some jobs. And when we talked about the development, we talked about infrastructure development in Indonesia. And the threat of the non-existence of some work in Indonesia has become truly real here. We know that actually in Jakarta, for example, now some toll roads do not need people to operate the charging system. Now, when we're talking about this, I really doubt that development really helped, right? The creation of jobs in developing countries, because the fact is that some people begin to lose their jobs. How would both of you, Professor Willetts and Dr. Salmi, explain, and to what extent do you actually agree to how Indonesia is getting prepared for developing its country? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very good question, and to me it goes to the heart of the questions raised by the theme of this conference, which is about not just development, but what is sustainable development. And I think the definitions that we just heard, that whatever our pathway of development is to be, it needs to be something that can sustain us and can sustain the planet. And there are many, many different ways that can look. and there are many, many types of jobs that might exist within that future. And so to me, I think I don't equate development with technology. I don't see the two as the same thing. I think that, sure, technologies will play a role in our future and will change the nature of the types of jobs that are available, but I don't see that as it completely in conflict with having a prosperous society where people have jobs. The jobs can be of many different natures depending on how a society chooses to develop, and it's those conscious choices about which development path to take that will influence the types of jobs that are available. So I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Thank you. If I could add on this point, so I think I do agree with you, Prof, that we cannot actually run away from the technologies, all right? And every day, I think like those days, for example, like handphones, right? And then software. It keeps, I think we not be able to actually master that particular software, and then the next day it's already become obsolete. So we can't control this. But I think we should become a technology user rather than victims of the technologies, right? We must create more jobs within technologies, right? It's not only Indonesia, but I think it's happening as well in Malaysia. You know, in Malaysia we have a lot of toll along the highway. So those days we need people to actually give you the tickets. Now everything just touch and go. We just have, so it means that from many tolls, now maybe only one person that supervises the whole things. Right. But again, they just really switch on one part of the what we call the system. But with the technologies, they can actually creating more stuff within the technologies. A good example about technologies, actually, we of course cannot create. We're not actually giving creating jobs. But the individual is himself to need actually creating his own jobs. I give you an example. Nowadays, if you graduates, you not actually encourage them to go outside and go and find a job. We wanted them to be at least entrepreneurial with the entrepreneurial mindset using the technology. They actually the job creators, not the job seekers, right? So we do have social media. They can actually using Facebook to sell things online. I think everybody can become business manager. So this is the positive side that we can actually opt on the technology. Like I said, we should become a technology user rather than victims of the technologies. I think I hope I answered your question.
Okay, still more questions, Mark? Okay, thank you. Is there another questions from this part?
Thank you very much. My name is Vidyanis Puspitana for Bogor Agricultural University. My study program is Resource and Environmental Economics. And I have a question for Professor Juliet Willetts. My question is to build a proper infrastructure regarding wash or water sanitation and hygiene. One of the challenges in Indonesia is urban sprawl phenomena, such as in Bandung or other big cities in Indonesia. As you know, it would cost a lot of money to improve the infrastructure. According to you, what is the possible way to tackle this challenge? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think my answer relates to the kinds of opportunities I tried to point to at the end, and maybe I explain a little bit better. So you're right, the urban sprawl is very difficult to deal with, and especially when people are living in very dense quarters, it's very hard to build infrastructure in such places. And there are a few different solutions. So if we're thinking about informal settlements and areas where it's really very dense, in other places in Africa and in Latin America, they are moving to dry forms of sanitation. So instead of having a water-based toilet, they're instead collecting the waste immediately and taking it for processing for then reuse in agriculture. So it's called container-based sanitation. And at first people were laughing at this idea, that it's thinking it's not a good pathway, it's not the pathway that other developed countries have followed, but they're now proving the cost effectiveness of these different methods, and if you have enough health and safety rules and regulations, that it's possible to collect the waste in a very different way, but then actually makes it easier to reuse. So that's one example. And another example is what I tried to explain with the circular economy of reusing things within a smaller area. So in some places, or throughout Indonesia, there have been communal sanitation systems built just for a few hundred households, and thinking about how we can treat that water locally and then reuse it locally is another of the solutions, rather than bringing in water from far away and then taking it to far away. So I think there's some of the solutions and new pathways that can be followed.
Thank you very much. I would understand because you could see me. My name is Nawas. I'm representing Mapindo from Bali. Within my short time sitting here, I learned a lot about sustainability. I also learned a lot that there has been cooperations with different countries in order to help Indonesian people, especially those living in remote areas, living in a sustainable way. However, I also witnessed some, how do you call it? We have a saying. We like what we call hangat-hangat tai ayam, which means the warmth is only a few seconds. Meaning, if there is a donation or if there is a project organized by countries, say for example Australian, takes for example related to windmill, related to toilets, related to how we recycle things. Yeah, everybody is always into it. Everybody is so motivated in doing it. However, within a month, it dies down. And if you go to Nusa Penida, for example, you could see the windmills, which are only with one, what you call it, one flap of the fan or something. And then toilets are not well kept, and so on. My question is, do you have any suggestions on what both governments do in order to not only designing and implementing projects, but also to ensure that the project is sustainable and then it lasts, if it's possible, forever? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's a really, it's a very, very good question. And as someone who works in many ways to do with the aid and development sector, it's a question we pose to ourselves all the time about how to move away from discrete projects that, like you say, it doesn't last, and instead how to design interventions so that they create change at a more systemic level. And so I'll give two examples. So one example, so you mentioned toilets which aren't used, the windmills which no longer function. There are many such things all around the country, here and in many other places. And for sanitation, for toilets, one of the things that people realized was that giving infrastructure, but without an accompanying process of behavior change and a thinking and change in mentality, doesn't lead to a change in behavior. And so toilets get built, and then they get used to store the rice or something else, and people continue to use the bush. And so a shift to focus on, well, what is it that will change people's minds, and how can we support local governments and local civil society actors to be equipped with those methods to help change people's minds, and then how can we support as I was discussing, the small-scale private sector to be ready to provide those services, and how can we just set up a more sustainable system where we're both creating demand by the community and the population, and we're also ensuring that there's an available supply and that there are businesses that are ready to provide these services, rather than creating a project or giving something. And then another example of, I guess, a different way of thinking about aid and development interventions is one of the ways that the Australian government is working here with national government of Indonesia to do with water and sanitation connections, so connecting to sewers, connecting to pipe services. They, rather than projects, they're using grants from national government to local governments, but with on an output base. So too often they realise that when funds are given from national government to local government, they may not be spent on the correct thing, the quality may not be good. So the whole idea with this initiative was to demonstrate that if we judge things on the outputs and we only pay when we see that there are good connections and that people are paying for their service, then the funds will come from the national government to local government. And that thinking of what's called performance-based payments or output-based aid, output-based payments, this is changing the way that many of the budgeting procedures are being done in that sector. And so it shows how an initiative that's through aid and development, that's not like a project, but it's about working on how we understand there's a problem in the system of incentives between local government and national government. How can we change the incentives so that local government will carry out the work and will invest in the PDAM and in the connections, but also ensure that that financial flow from national to local level. So I hope those two examples show that there are many different ways of working and that we can move away from projects that don't last very long.
If I go on with points, actually another important thing is actually monitoring. When we have something, we need to actually monitor. And plus point, we also need to have audits on the project that we have to. At least someone can make corrective action and corrections with a particular project. So monitoring, and that's why governance is also important. In any project, to make sure everything is transparent, everybody knows what's going on. So monitoring and also governance and control the particular project is also very important.
Thank you very much. My name is Juliet Willetts. I'm from Samratulangi University, Manado. I have a question to Professor Willetts. As you mentioned before, there are about 200 countries agreed on SDGs, and however, achieving all these goals might be costly to some countries, and also for many local governments as well. Now, however, on the other side, local governments also they have their own interest on how to increase the welfare of their society, of their people. Now, is there any solution? I think, in my opinion, there might be some conflicting interest between achieving the goals and enhancing the welfare of local people. Now, are there any solutions? Like, for example, in many areas in Eastern Indonesia, because I'm from Eastern Indonesia, some local governments actually they are not prioritizing on clean water, because their main problem is not water. Actually, they have lack access to clean water, but it's not their main issue in that area. However, in order to promote the SDGs, then we should provide better access to clean water. So how do you address this? I mean, is there any solution? Thank you so much.
To me, it comes down to having good participatory bottom-up processes for decision-making about priorities. And I think, from what I understand, the different budgeting processes at local level that's supposed to happen. There is a process for participation in those decisions, but as I understand it, it doesn't always play out in that way, and things can still be, things that are given as a priority by a community may not be taken up and actually be budgeted for. But to me, that's, you're right that the Sustainable Development Goals, it's a global framework and it's a top-down framework, and somehow that has to meet bottom-up, and we can't assume that the priorities that are decided higher up are always going to be relevant locally. So I think I'm in agreement with you that we need to have effective methods to ensure the priorities that are chosen in a particular place actually meet the needs of those people at that time, that it shouldn't be an imposition that takes from outside.
One more comment actually, if you don't mind. Actually, that's where the conflict actually occurs, because on one side it's coming from top down, while actually we expect that bottom up local government, actually the society, the community also should get involved in promoting the SDGs. However, what if like they just don't care? I mean, especially for some governments, let's say, yeah, we are okay with some local governments who are thinking of enhancing the welfare, but some other governments they don't. They are just thinking enhancing their own welfare. Right? So, and is there any like punishment or like penalty or something that actually we can have? Like, I don't know, because otherwise it is just SDGs is just like a theme to be remembered. No more than that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any silver bullet for this. To me, it's a fundamental question about citizens holding governments to account, and what are our ways to do that, and how effectively do we use those mechanisms. And I think until we can sort that out, it's very hard to have a fully democratic society, and where the decisions reflect those of the views of the people.
Thank you.
Heni from Universitas Indonesia. I would like to ask you about waste. So actually, Indonesia and other countries have rapid changes in technology, right? Like you said, is changes is every day, every time, and then whether your countries have a thing about the waste. From technology, right? Handphone is changing every time. We need to, like you said, we need to use technology user rather than victim of technology, right? So how your government or from your country to handle this problem, the waste from the technology? Thank you.
For me, I think, how it was expressed earlier in terms of being users and not victims is absolutely critical. And I have two sons who are 11 and 15, and we have daily conversations about technology and handphones and how much one should and shouldn't use them, and for what purpose we should and shouldn't use them. And to me, it's having those conversations. We have to be conscious how these technologies are changing our lives, are changing the way we communicate and relate to one another, how they're changing dynamics around accountability between citizens and governments. How can we use them to good effect? And we need to keep asking that, and we need to keep noticing how are they causing things to become worse, causing people to become more closed rather than more open, causing there to be less accountability rather than more accountability. So to me, it's about remaining and trying to increase how conscious we are about the change that's taking place to all of us and to the next generation. And I also think it's about how we're bringing that into our education system, because in our education system and in our families is where our values are set. And ultimately, our values are going to determine the ways in which we use technology. So if we have sound values, it doesn't matter what the technology is, we'll use it to good effect. But if we ignore the setting of those foundations, that's when I think maybe we get into trouble.
Maybe to add on something. Right. I think when we talk about technology, we are talking about how to to actually treat the waste from technologies. Am I right? Okay. So of course this is something an issue as well. But in Malaysia, our city council, especially the one that I come from, Penang. If you go to Penang, they always have saying that greener, cleaner of Penang. So what they do is that I think most of in the developed country we have different ways. You can go bin to actually dispose your waste. So we also encourage especially for new housing developments. So the developer need to also include this as part of the. They need to comply with this. They must make sure they have these facilities for the resident to know where to actually dispose their waste. And we also go to schools, like education from the beginning, to encourage students how they can actually do a proper, to destroy their rubbish, their waste. So educations, city councils, perhaps the government itself also encourage we're giving awards to those companies that actually can report on how much they actually treat their waste economically towards their sustainability. So this is kind of activities, encouragement for the governments to make sure that we actually treat our waste wisely. And I think it's not only for government parts. I think most of the restaurants, if you go to Malaysia nowadays, if let's say you not finish your meals, they actually charge you more. So in order to actually encourage people to not waste your food, because we are actually having a problem with the food security and also the food safety. And in a few more years to time, so because we don't have a clean water to treat our land, we can't do a proper crops, we can't produce a good foods. So this is how we actually encourage all the restaurants to impose these kinds of policy. Unquote, so unquote. All right.
There are a lot of examples from Malaysia and also Australia how to deal with technology, and also how to deal with the issue of sustainable environment. I guess that's very great examples. Okay, maybe probably question from me. No, it's alright. So for both of you, it's as you mentioned, Professor Juliet, that the role of women in a sustainable development is quite low compared to the role of men. Probably you have some suggestions, because I know that as a woman we have a lot of things to do. It's very every day we are women to have multitask jobs, and sometimes we don't have time to think about sustainable environment and so on. So probably that's the reason why the role of women here regarding sustainable environment is lower than the role of men. So could you please explain and maybe have some solutions how to improve the role of women in terms of sustainable development?
Okay, well, it's a good start that there are 3 women here to discuss this. Maybe there are men in the room who also have some views to share. I think I've done a lot of research on gender equality in relation to water and the water sector. And I guess what is noticeable in many countries is that water and sanitation are usually in the domain of women. And yet their voice in decision making, in water allocations, in management of the resource, they don't have much voice. But we've also seen that can be turned around quite easily, so long as people start paying attention to who's making decisions and whose voices are heard. And that one of the things to change gender dynamics both women and men have to agree to a change. And what has been found in many communities is that men might not accept women suddenly leading a village or suddenly being part of decisions to do with infrastructure. But when it's to do with water and sanitation, because that's something in women's usual domain, then the men were finding it acceptable and they thought it was appropriate that women should have voice on that, and they were supportive of women having, say, a role on a committee, whereas in the past maybe they wouldn't. So I think that in water and sanitation it is a possible entry point for women to have more voice, and I think that we need to think, as I say, about both sides, about what needs to change on the side of women and what needs to change on the side of men if we're going to have more equal voices, whether it's at the community level, managing water, or whether we're trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
All right, okay. I think women has a breakthrough the glass ceilings, right? Most of the cases. I think if you look at, I'm not sure whether in Indonesia's institution, if you go to Malaysia, most women actually enter up to the higher level of education. We go to the class, I can see that actually 70 is female students and only 30 is male students. So, but however, when they come to the real market, to the workforce, what happened to them? They may just start working, and then when they have their own family, they just become a housewife. So, but again, these are the things that when we talk about the gender equality, we should be given the same opportunity to women to actually excel in their career path. So, as a Malaysian government, I think if you have heard that our Prime Minister wanted to have at least a percentage of female board of directors in the listed and in the government-linked company. So this is another way to actually helping women to break through the glass ceiling. And another point is that actually haunts their female or women, especially in our region, because we thought that women is actually someone that just need to help the breadwinner, which is the spouse. So we tend to, our culture tend to just give the opportunity to the other gender, and then we just sacrifice our own vision and mission. So me and my team, we did a project on the microfinance, whereby we give, we selected a few women to actually understand how do they actually manage their microfinance. But from the project, we found that women do have talents, but when it comes to decision making, they still refer to the other gender. So it means that they're not there to actually speak out. It could be because of the culture, it could be because of their upbringing, and I think how to actually tackle this issue is by giving them a proper education, a proper information. How do they actually can stand at par as the other gender?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Gadjah. I'm from Universitas Jakarta. Actually, I don't know if it's questions or comments, but I just wonder why Indonesia have a lot of problems, especially in the water access. Is it because of we have a huge population? Is it because we have separation island? But when I write down about the solutions, most of you talking about we have to educate the people, we have to training the people. But in my mind, I just thinking, is it the awareness to become? Is it educated people and awareness people is different, because not all educated people will increase or will aware about the water access. For example, like I heard about there's news say that there are poor people who are not educated people. He spent 20 years to access the water, and most people say that he is crazy. But after 20 years, the village become success, and they got the water access, and he got the award. So I mean, is it need to increase our educations, or is it which one is better to increase our awareness or to increase our knowledge? Is it different or not? You got my point. Yeah, you got my point, right? Sorry, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I think no, it's not just about education. It's about the question that was asked earlier about which things get prioritized and by whom. So who helps identify when there's a need, and actually the gender equality question comes into play because often it's women who will notice if the water supply, for instance, is very, very far away, because they're the ones who experience the long walk and the time that it takes. And so sometimes in decision-making processes about which infrastructure should be prioritized, when women's voice is low, then, for instance, water infrastructure might not come to the top of the list. But if we ask both women and men, maybe we would realize that actually half the population would like to prioritize that. So I think the first half of the answer to your question is that it's not about an education level, whether you want or need something. That's about what's our process for understanding needs and for prioritizing needs. But then, in order to have functioning water systems, functioning sanitation systems, that does require some technical knowledge. And throughout Indonesia, a lot of community-managed systems have been set up and then left on their own to look after them. Whereas in a city, there's a PDAM, there are people with experience in the technical aspects who look after those systems, and that there's a very big disparity, and that instead we really should be making sure resources are directed to help local governments, who then help support the community management with the technical skills. So education level and understanding and technical capacity are still important for these services to last for a long time. Otherwise, we have the projects that were mentioned earlier. We build something, and then we don't know how to maintain it. The system breaks, and then it's a wasted investment. So we do need education and capacity building to help things to function in a longer time. I hope that helps answer the two parts of the question.
It's not only in Indonesia. In Malaysia also we do have water problem. And it's quite surprising if you notice that our weather is actually all year round we have rains. So by right, we shouldn't have a problem of water scarcities. But when we talk about what is the definition of scarcities, we need to go into deeper. So we may have enough water, but we may not have enough clean water. So this is another thing that we need to actually look. I said that our dam always full of water, but I think we still have scarce to actually supply clean water to our residents. So this is another issue. It's not only about the contaminated water, it's about the scarcity of the water. And I think if you go to Penang is very good with food, right? So why people said that why the food in Penang is very nice, it is because of the water. The water itself has a kind of flavor. It could be come from a good dam, right? So I think this is another factor that we need to think of. So we need to have not only the proper sanitation. Maybe in Malaysia we don't have quite a serious problem with the sanitation issues. It's only for if you go to indigenous places whereby it's very outskirts. Or maybe you go to Borneo, to Sabah and Sarawak because the logistic part is very difficult. So we may face this kind of problem. But overall, I think it's quite okay. But basically, we do facing the problem of the water scarcity in Malaysia.
If there is no more questions or comments, I will give some summary from our speakers today. So from Pak Tony Prasetiantono, he focused on the economic growth of Indonesia and also the Indonesian economic situation in Indonesia currently, and especially influenced by the global economy, such as the economy from United States and China. And also he explained about the challenge for Indonesian economy, such as the infrastructure that will influence the sustainable development in Indonesia. And he also explained about the equality using the Gini index and compare the Gini index of Indonesia with other countries such as China and Vietnam and also Malaysia and Singapore. And he suggests that to improve the economic growth and also the equality of development in Indonesia, Indonesia needs to focus on the growth in an infrastructure, in a human capital, which is including education and also health. That's from Pak Tony Prasetiantono, and from the Professor Juliet mentioned some results from her research on water and sanitation. And there are some key messages that she proposed in this in her speech, such as work on the SDGs in an integrated way, observing environmental limits and also social justice. And also she focused on the role of small-scale enterprises and also the role of women to improve the sustainable development. And from Dr. Salmi, she explains about the sustainability leadership, and she starts with the definitions of sustainable development and give some example from Malaysia regarding to sustainability development and how we solve the problem of sustainable development with involvement of sustainability leadership. Thank you very much. That's what I can summarize from our discussions, and thank you also for the participants who give some comments, also questions. I will close the speak today with thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.